am ready. My machine's not quite.
Oh, okay.
I made the mistake of putting it to sleep as opposed to turning it off. So it's gone down to the point where the battery is low enough that it has to charge before it will successfully turn on. So, having said that, we'll let this thing sit for a couple minutes. But I can still start parts of the presentation without that, and then hopefully we can. I just won't be able to show a whole lot of stuff, but I can give you a bit of information about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, at this point, it's either a choice between me rambling or you rambling. And you're probably more interesting at this point, so.
Oh, I want to ramble.
Oh, ramble for a few
John
minutes.
wants to ramble too.
Yeah, before I forget, there is a conference coming up in Toronto on the February 23rd, 24th, 25th weekend. It's called PodCamp, PODCAMP, PodCamp Toronto. It's a pretty good conference. Anyone who's interested in social media and podcasts. It's a lot of fun. It's free. Saturday night they have a darn good party with free beer and free food at Ryerson Polytechnic, or Ryerson University, I guess it's called now, yeah. So look up PodCamp. You can register. They like you to register so they know how many are coming. And it's a real good conference. I may be missing it for the first time in years because on the Thursday I get back from Florida, and on the Friday I'm going to a thing called a Scotch nosing, in which you get to taste different scotches. And it's really good because I can't afford these scotches that we get to taste. I mean, yeah.
Can we get the information for that?
Yeah, it's put on by the Guelph Rotary, the Guelph Trillium Rotary. Okay, and it's Friday, February 23rd, I think is the date. Tickets are $125. It's in the Guelph Cotton Club. And dinner is included. It's a fantastic dinner. And you'll get to taste at least 4 different high quality scotches. So yeah. Now the whole thing is you may want to have a designated driver if you're coming in because, yeah.
So 120 plus the cost of your taxi.
Yes, yeah, or get a hotel in Guelph, who cares, you know, but anyway, yeah, the Scotch nosing is really good, yeah. So, I've blattered on, and we're ready, there we go, perfect.
Thank you very much, John. Oh, and the PodCamp is annual?
Yes.
All right, I have lists that I will have to add it to.
One screen for my notes and one screen for stuff I'm trying to show off. As written up, it says Let's Encrypt, but Let's Encrypt is sort of half the job. Let's Encrypt is their end of things. So Let's Encrypt we'll start off with their about us, because this tells us a lot of stuff about it. So it's a free, automated, open certificate authority run for the public's benefit. So you can get yourself a certificate for use on your web server, your email server, anything that needs SSL or TLS. And at the moment, you need to have access to DNS and or the web server, just so they can verify. They do what they call domain verification. The certificates only last 90 days, but the tools they have make it really easy to get a new one before the 90 days are up. And they don't cost you anything. So that's a big plus for me because I know I used to take a look at some of the quote better certificates, and we'd be spending as much on the certificates as I was spending on the computer to put the certificates on. So that didn't work very well for me. So as I say, free. Anyone who owns a domain name can use Let's Encrypt to get a certificate for it at zero cost. It's automatic, secure. As of a year ago, none of the browsers took Let's Encrypt's root certificate as a source for a valid tree of certificates. As of very recently, almost all of them do. So if you run with a Let's Encrypt certificate, almost no one is going to complain that you're actually running with a Let's Encrypt certificate. So they brought the entry basically down to the point where if you don't trip over the line, you're good. And it, as you say, it's transparent, open. They have an open standard called ACME for doing the certificates. You can actually, if you really want to and test things, you can actually set up your own certificate authority because all the source code is available on GitHub. Same for almost all the clients. So, Let's Encrypt is run by the Internet Security Research Group. They've been going for about 2 years because it took a while to get things rolling, and I should actually show a bit about they like I said, it's a free service for us, but they cost them a fair bit of money. You can either make a personal donation, or if you're a company and you've got a lot of money, like some of these groups, you can donate big bucks for it because the latest estimates is it's going to cost them about $2 million to run the whole system for the next year or so. They're doing close to 20 million certificates right now. So they do, it's a non-trivial amount of infrastructure. And it just keeps going and going. Let's see what was going down here. Blah, blah, blah. Oh yes, their year, can I find their year reviews? Because they talk about it, and you can see they have a nice curve. Statistics. I don't know if people have seen the notes recently, but according to Mozilla's tracking, we have just hit half the web is encrypted, half the traffic over the web is encrypted. However, given that Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Google are all encrypted by default, that's a large percentage. So as a traffic, we're at half. As a site count, is probably considerably lower than that. You can see here how they've gone from next to nothing. This is when they, back here in November, November 2015, they went, or December, they went to an open beta, and they had 2,000 or 3,000 certificates out. And then May last year, all of a sudden, or sorry, I should say here first, end of January, they went out of beta, and anybody could get a certificate, and they all of a sudden went to 500,000 certificates. And you can see it's been nice, steady growth with the occasional jump. I'm trying to figure out what's important about some of these dates where it just goes zooming straight up. Part of my guess is this is when some of the people who are running systems on their own actually had a chance to sit down and try things out. Because there's another jump here just before Christmas. So now they're sitting at 24, 25 million certificates out there. I happen to know that as of this afternoon, I have about 15 because I made a lot of test certificates getting ready for this presentation. There's SSL certificates aren't just for web pages. As I said, you can use them for email, you can use them for just about anything. If you take a look in set services, you take a look for TLS or SSL, you'll see protocols that will run with certificates that I know I've never heard of before. So you can use it for anything from LDAP, MySQL. The limits, there are some limits on. Oops, let's go other window. Okay. So like I said, they have this fairly big infrastructure. They've been running for about a year and a bit. They're now, in terms of certificates, one of the larger certificate issuers. There's all kinds of documentation on what to do with it, questions about what happens to my certificates if I issue a new one, do I have to worry about revoking the old one, that kind of stuff. And the part that sort of makes it all useful for us are the clients, which is what you're running on your local machine to get the certificate in the first place. So they have the main one, the original one that they came out with was called, the package for us was called Let's Encrypt. And they eventually actually handed it over to the EFF and they renamed it to CertBot. And if you go, you can see they have it for lots of different packages. If you actually go to, okay, let's just start with there we go. Not a very busy or technically complex page, but it does tell you the useful bits as far as most people are concerned. Namely, tell them what kind of software you're using as a server. So for instance, at home I'm using Apache on, and I list ones way down. You can see all the different platforms for Linux that they have. Actually, it's not just Linux, because Windows is on the list here too. Mac, other Unix, other non-Unix. So FreeBSD. At home, I'm using a combination of recent Fedora and one Red Hat machine. Select both of those. Say you want to be able to do it via an automated procedure. Well, what do you know? CertBot's actually in Red Hat in their extended extra packages for enterprise Linux. So you can install that. Nice and simple. How to set it up. If you just, at that point, if you're running Red Hat or CentOS, and you type in certbot /Apache, it'll take a look for your quote standard virtual host setup for a HTTP conf.d/whatever the default is. And it'll look for the mod SSL stuff. It'll actually it'll go through, it'll get you a certificate for your host name on the machine that you're running right now, whatever its default host is. It'll build a config file, it'll set up logs, it'll give you a lot of suggestions on how to do things, and basically at that point, you have one set up. This is assuming, of course, that your external DNS gets you to your machine because they have to verify. Basically, there's four kinds of certificates. There's self-signed certificates, where if you know the guy, you can trust him. And if you don't know the guy, you can assume that the traffic's encrypted, and that's it. There's domain validation, where the issuer verifies that you in fact control the host name that you want the certificate for. So in the case of stuff with CertBot, you either have to run CertBot on the host that you need the certificate for, or there's also one via DNS where basically they do the same handshake that they do to test that you own the thing, but they do it via DNS. So what happens when you go for a certificate, the handshake basically goes, it builds up it sends a request off to Let's Encrypt saying, I'd like a certificate for blah, 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 here's my CSR. The Let's Encrypt gives it a magic token and says, put it here in your web space. Then it comes back, then you do that, you say, I've done it, it goes and reads that file in that location, and if it gets the answer back that it gave you, then it generates a certificate and hands it to you. And at that point, you've got a certificate for 90 days. It'll store it in a part of the file system for itself for later. For doing renewals, it'll automatically track that this is the 7th time you've done a renewal. So it goes through quite nicely, quite easily. Okay, back to the types of certificates. The domain ones, like I said, it guarantees that at least as far as DNS is concerned, you're talking to who they say they are. If it happens to be Microsoft with some funny Unicode character in the name, so it looks like an O, but it isn't actually Microsoft, unless you're taking a really good look at the URL and stuff. There's no verification as to who actually runs it. There's also organizational validation. These are ones where they start to cost money because people have to do paperwork in order to get it to. So, for instance, at the university, somebody wants a request, somebody wants a certificate, we make
That was exciting.
lovely feedback.
A little further.
Okay, are we good now?
Hello? Okay, here we go.
I will try not to do that again. The organizational ones, the domain validation ones, you can do for free because the computers do all the heavy lifting. They verify that you can fetch the page, automatically puts up the page, blah, blah, blah. Checks the DNS. The DNS version is similar. You say, I like a certificate. They say, here's a magic DNS record to put in for this host name. You put it in, you say, I've done it. It goes and checks your DNS server, says, oh, okay, you got the magic number, boom, here's your certificate. So they guarantee that you have a certain amount of control over your system, but they're not trying to find out who you say you are. So if you get I suspect Microsoft.co is probably owned by Microsoft already, but if it wasn't, or Harvey's.co or whatever like that, some big name, there's no guarantee that they are who they say they are. The certificate is valid as far as they're concerned. The organizational one, like I said, it starts costing money because people have to do validation on paperwork. Things like who owns the company, who's the president of the company. They want to be able to, you have to send, in some cases, send in a copy of your business card, send in a copy of your corporation papers. There's also enhanced validation, which actually makes the lock look different, and it tells you even more about the system, but that hasn't really caught on much. But, so we're stuck with the domain validation ones. But for free, it's a really good system. I'm not going to complain about it. Most people are going to see the lock and will be happy about it. There are possibly ways to make a mess with it, but I'm not too terribly worried about it. I'd rather have the stuff be safely transported than not. In most cases, you're going to know who's running these places anyway. They recommend running they have the renewal cron job. They recommend twice a day. What it does is it goes, the renewal process goes through the list of all the certificates you have issued. Anything that's up for expiry in the next 30 days, it'll try and renew. So if you run it once a month and something happens when that cron job runs and it doesn't work, you might be in trouble. If you run it once a week, you've got 3 or 4 times to try and get it before you have to worry about it. As soon as it gets a new certificate, the clock restarts and it's going to wait 60 days before it goes and checks again. So running it twice a day means that you can have incredibly intermittent processes running, and the fact that you're going to try it 50 or 60 times pretty much guarantees that one of them will work. As they say, please select a random minute in the hour for your request, because at 20 million certificates, good for 60 days each is 300,000 certificates a day, which is 4 per second. So if everybody did it on the hour, there'd be this incredible spike, and things might time out, you might not get a connection, in which case you would need 40 or 50 different connection tries to do it. So that is a bit about where to get it. Once you've actually got it set up, I've set up a few at home. Let's see if I can find a couple of them. You can never have too many names, so I have a separate one for playing around with. Most of my domains are only accessible via IPv6, mostly because that allows me to have it on more than one machine. They're coming up. It may not be able to get to IPv6 over this one right now. Let's try one of the ones that's on the server that has there we go. My request tracking instance. If you go up and take a look at tell me about it. There, owner of this website does not supply ownership information. Verified by Encrypt. We haven't gone there before. I'll tell you all about that. View the certificate. Belongs serial number issued by Let's Encrypt Authority X3. Part of. You notice that Let's Encrypt actually has an organizational certificate, but I don't. So begins on December 13th, expires March 13th, so 90 days. Nice fingerprints so you can verify that you actually have the one that you think you have. One thing that's I find incredibly useful once I have things initially set up is there are several places out there that will run tests against your SSL server, just to check what kind of encryption you're using, what kind of handshakes. That's my new favorite one. Don't make me type this. Is run by Mozilla, and it's called Observatory. So you can pick a site. There's the one. Okay. Let's try one of the ones I just set up today. I know they can handle IPv6, so they will run, and they actually run several different test suites and aggregate the results. So it's giving me a C right now on the initial results, and it'll explain why. By default, they don't have a lot of the cross, at least for cross sites, scripting, content type frames and stuff like that. They don't enable it by default. They'll give it to you in the config file commented out. While some of these in fact are best practices, there's a lot of applications that aren't happy enough or not well behaved enough to actually make use of all these features. For instance, the request tracking one that I showed up there, if I actually turn on the sort of default values for the content types, the frame options and stuff, it breaks the CSS. It works just fine, it just looks bad because parts of the CSS aren't being loaded properly due to the way they have the application structure. Third party, okay, it's still busy running. This could take a couple minutes. SSL Labs will tell you everything from all 120 different encryption types that you'll handle to here's a list of 300 different, or 100 different processors, it seems like, operating system, browser, version numbers, and which ones will work and which ones won't work and why they won't work. In some cases, it's the encryption types don't have any overlaps. Things like Windows XP. If you're using Internet Explorer still on the Windows XP boxes, a lot of the better configured web servers that have all the proper security modes turned on won't allow you to actually browse because there's no encryption scheme that you understand that it understands. There we go, A+. And you can go along and take a look at all the different, the bits. So we got a really good certificate. I suspect, hold on a second. Let's shrink it down a bit. There we go. So it's not quite cut off so much. So everything is reasonably strong. It's one of those cases where if you try and tighten it up any better to get you a better score, you start dropping things that people you can talk to. So it tells us about the certificate and the whole chain for the certificate, and which versions of TLS and SSL are enabled. Let's go one more time, shrink it down. There we go. Actually getting words down the side here. So we're disabled all the direct SSL and just use TLS. As I said, pages and pages of types. Here we go, handshaking simulation. So this one won't work with Android 2.3.7 because it doesn't handle no SNI. SNI is part of TLS that allows you to specify multiple hosts in the same or in a conversation. So, for instance, I have about 6 web servers at home. They're all on the same box, sharing an IP address. If your browser doesn't support SNI, then you can only get to the default one on HTTPS. You can get to all the other ones on just straight HTTP because the protocol, or I should say, you can get to them with different, you can only get to the default one if they all have different certificates. You can also specify when you get a certificate that you want multiple names for it, what they call SANs, for alternate names. And so you can specify that this certificate is good for these 4 domains. And as long as you control all 4 of those domains, it'll give you a certificate that's valid for that. So on some of these, it'll go down and say, yes, it works, no, it doesn't, here's why it doesn't work. And it goes through lots and lots and lots and lots. And then it'll start telling you about different problems with some of the protocols. This is the reason that some of the older ones, SSL 2 and 3, have been, I was going to say deprecated, but that's actually not a strong enough term. Deprecated implies that, okay, it does work, but don't put money behind it, because there are problems with it. So lots and lots of details. Whether or not it handles, for instance, your strict transport security. Basically, you can set it up so that your web server tells the browser, if you come here securely, only ever come here securely. And you can give it a time frame. So say, anytime in the next 6 months, if you come to this website, do it securely. And then if they come back, the clock starts over again at whatever the response is. So you can say 6 months, 6 months, 6 months, and it'll just be this window. And that way, if somebody gets onto your server and tries to make some changes to it, or somebody hijacks your DNS, then it's going to start complaining about the certificate doesn't match, doesn't have a secure version, there's only an insecure version, stuff like that. As you see there, it takes, it's hard to say, but it's about a minute to run all those tests. And, yeah?
Getting an A, I mean, by default you get an E from the certificate, but then you have to go and change the configuration to get an A, right?
Yeah. The default one that they give you gives you, I think it gives you a B out of the box. It used to give you an A out of the box, but they've started grading harder. Since HTTP is becoming more popular, they figure people might as well learn to do it right. So as you can see here, Maggie's Den is, I've got an IPv6 subnet through, what is it, 6XS. Who they're trying to get out of the IPv6 business because they think your ISP should be doing it. There's lots of little ways. I'm going to be sending out the notes that I have here later on as well. There's also was a neat article on how Etsy rolled out SSL for everybody, and some of the things about how do you handle 10,000 or 100,000 certificates on a proxy system or whatever. How do you keep it all secure? They actually work with Let's Encrypt. They're as a sort of a major client. There are some. Let's go back. They even have a version. They even have a version here for Windows. Projects integrating with it. They're getting it all over the place. Frequently asked questions. Do you issue certificates for anything else? Yes, you can use them for whatever you want to. They don't care what you use it for as long as things are going to have to line up in order for people to use it for.
They limit it to one certificate per domain?
No, that's actually a little further down the page here. Lifetime 90 days, and they tell you why they decided on 90 days. They don't do organization or extended validation. You can get here multiple names using this subject alternate name mechanism. So on a single certificate, you can have up to 100 different domain names. You have to be able to verify to their software that you control all 100 of them, and you can do that. They do not do wildcards, so I can't just get one certificate to handle splat.maggiesden.ca or splat.lostcamp.ca. They're not doing that yet because it's too easy to set things up to farm out parts of their domain. But they're working on it. They're debating it. Hopefully, they're not necessarily for most of the subscribers because they're trying to make it so easy to get a certificate with whatever combination of names you want that it shouldn't make any difference. Okay. There's the limits. Yeah, they're not going to tell you what IP addresses that they're using for their validators because that could change because after all, part of it could be on the cloud. Things may have to change, so they're not going to say only let, so you can't route things in through the back door and have it do internal only websites. They also have, okay, where is it? That's okay. Rate limits. That's the one I want. So there is essentially for a practical point of view, there's no real limits. You can have multiple certificates for multiple sites. You can have multiple sites on a single certificate. You can make combinations and have these 4 sites on that certificate and these 6 sites on that certificate. And the system automatically tracks what you have checked out, for lack of a better term. Does this have SSH installed on it?
SSH?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Let's just see if I can. If I can log in I can show you some of the config stuff. And if I can't log in, then you don't get to see me attempt to type my password. Okay, this box is currently having some problems with DNS at the moment, so we will hopefully come back to that. They do have everything for Let's Encrypt is stored in /etc/Let's Encrypt. They have one directory for each domain that you're getting a certificate for, or rather one per certificate named after the first site on the list. So, for instance, at home, there's Let's Encrypt, and then there's live, archive, CSRs. Under archive and live, there's the list of the different hosts that I have. Inside the live is a bunch of symbolic links into the archive, because when you renew a certificate, you get a completely new certificate. It makes a new private key, makes a new CSR, sends that in, submits that, gets you a new certificate back, installs it in the next slot in the archive, and updates the symbolic links for the live system to point to that. So unless you explicitly revoke one, you can actually roll back to previous copies of your certificate, given that they're still valid, because they're only good for 90 days. So they were talking about on the SSL labs, one of the options was pinning your SSL certificate. So you can tell, your application can tell the browser, remember this certificate for this host, or for this site. If it ever changes, it's not me. And what you can do is you can give it a list of certificates. So if you accidentally roll over your certificates, and everybody's going, I can't get to your site, because you haven't, is complaining about it's not the right certificate, you can actually roll back to the certificate you had last week, and then make changes to your config so it tells about both certificates. Then when people come and visit, they'll get the new copy of the certificate, and then you can roll forward from there. Okay, what's it complaining about first?
So Jim, at renewal time, it's not necessary to update that DNS resource record with a new token?
If you're using the DNS one to do that, it is. Because it's a magic one-time magic value. So they actually have inside the latest client code for CertBot now has hooks in it for doing DNS validation. Some of the other clients have that built in a different way. The problem is that there's as many ways to update a DNS record as there are hosting systems. And this, including, the 4 or 5 different ways I can think of, you'd have to do it just for people running a little server at home type of deal. So it's literally, it's a magic text record.
But is it one time I do it, then I can renew constantly?
No, it's it's part of the handshake, and it's the same with the magic file inside the regular HTTP renewal, because basically they want to verify that when you make the request, that you're controlling the DNS and or the web server. So what'll happen? So they actually have if you're using the DNS hooks in the latest version of CertBot, you can give it a script name to run, and it'll give the script the name of the domain that has the name of the host that we're working with and the magic value, and then it's up to the script to go and poke the DNS server and get the right numbers into that, and then when it comes back, it assumes that it's there. Then the Let's Encrypt it'll reply to Let's Encrypt saying it's there. Let's Encrypt will check with your definitive domain name servers to get that magic text record and verify the value. And if it gets it back, it goes, yes, he runs this, we can give him a certificate. They do have a fairly long timeout on that for the DNS version, as you can imagine. And as they say, make sure that you should also have another script that occasionally goes through your DNS and prunes all the magic values.
That was my next question.
Yes, because the magic value is going to change all the time, but it's one of these values that can actually be multi-valued in DNS. So, because text records can hold whatever information you want. So I haven't actually used it yet because until I sat down to actually start doing this, it was a case of, oh, that's coming, oh, it's here. They've actually, like I said, they got the double dash Apache version, which knows about all the standard, actually it knows all about all the standard Fedora, Red Hat Enterprise, CentOS, Debian, Ubuntu formats for web configuration. And it also knows how to turn on and turn off sites in Debian and stuff like that. So you can go from not having a site at all, say, certbot, double dash Apache, and then it knows your operating system, -d, foo.myserver.net or whatever. And when it comes back and it's all done, you answer the rest of the questions, which it'll remember for the renewal, because it likes to have a contact address so it can remind you that your certificate's coming up in a couple of weeks. And also that allows you, if you accidentally lose your main certificate and you still have your certificate sign-in request handy and your email address, you can actually go back in and say, could you please reissue this certificate? And here's and they'll say, yes, we issued that certificate to that person. You have that information, you can give it to you. So like I said, the timeout on the DNS is fairly long because they know this can be a 10-15 minute process in order to flush all the DNS servers and get rid of the stuff in the cache and stuff like that. The web one is a case of once the request is over, the file can go away, because the next time you go through, it'll give you a new random file, depending on how you're doing it. If you're doing it with like the Apache plugin, then it'll ask for you to put, there's a magic directory called .well-known, and then /let's encrypt / magic file name that they tell you, magic contents that they tell you. And so you can set up all your web servers to all serve this directory, and it'll just put all the responses in there as it needs them, and you can clean them up whenever. You can also do it standalone, which means you have to turn off the web server. And then when you run our certbot, it actually starts up a web server of its own and does all the handshake back and forth that way. That one's nice if you haven't done anything yet, but it means that when you go to renew, you have to actually, your renewal script goes, shut down my web server, run the renewals, start my web server, which is not hard, but could take a minute or so. Yeah.
That's what I use. Apache didn't work for some reason.
I was trying it, when I was trying it a couple months ago, Apache was in, first of all, did you actually install the Python certbot Apache RPM if you're running?
No, I just did the wget of the certbot.
Okay, that should actually grab all the parts then for you.
Then try to
a couple months ago, it was good solid like alpha quality code. now it's up to it's release worthy at this point. At least with the playing around that I was doing earlier today.
When Apache didn't work, I used the standalone.
Yeah.
And that worked fine.
Yeah.
And in my renewal, I do it once a week. Cron job just does shut down Apache.
Yeah.
Attempt and then
start it up again. And you either, if it didn't work, you got last week's certificate, which is still valid, and
But actually, it did renew.
Yeah.
That's Sunday.
Yep.
It shut down and detected that, okay, 60 days passed. Then it
Yeah.
went and got new certificates and stopped the batch and everything was fine.
yeah.
So it did work.
Yeah, it does work well. Now it's getting a whole lot friendlier. About back when they were in beta, it was the documentation wasn't really there either. So the code was a little iffy and the documentation was iffier, but it was still overall less work than things like what is it, Start TLS or Start SSL. Is one place that would do that. It's already 8 o'clock.
Do you have a number of questions?
Yeah, we'll go through a bunch of questions there.
So, a bunch of versions of the same question.
Yeah.
Different port, different service, different protocol type questions.
Okay.
This all is speaking HTTPs.
Yes. All the renewal process and stuff is all either HTTP or DNS based. Once you have that certificate, right at the moment I have, like I said, about 4 or 5 certificates on bosscamp.ca for different host names. One of them's for email, one of them's for the web, one of them's for my request tracking system. The ones that are for non-web services, I actually have several dummy websites defined at the moment because I'm using the web path version for doing the renewal. DNS wasn't available at the time. So what I do is I have a dummy site, and all it serves up is .wellknown/let's encrypt /blah, and it's read only. All you can do is get the file from it. And then all the sites share the same directory, so certbot can just talk to Let's Encrypt, get the certificate, but not install it for Apache, and just leave it in. Hey, it didn't whine this time. Good. So it'll get the certificate, it'll put it in a standard place. You can stuff set Let's Encrypt live /site name /privkey.pem and fullchain.pem inside your SMTP server config file, and then once the certificate gets renewed, you just cycle the.
So it doesn't need to offer that secret again to the
Well, it will. Like I said, I have several. I have at the moment because of the way I'm doing the renewals. I'm currently. I have an iMail. I have a mail.bosscamp.ca website, which serves one directory read only. I have a. What else am I using it for?
And its purpose is to what?
The purpose for that is to complete the handshake with Let's Encrypt to prove that you control mail.bosscamp.ca. I could do it. I can't, unfortunately, because I only have one IP address for the whole set. Or I guess I could define a second IP address on IPv6 specifically for all these non-web services. It has to be available. Something has to be accessible from Let's Encrypt in order to verify that you're running. So
I have 4 domains on one IP address.
yeah,
And the .well directory method did work.
yeah,
So the standalone was fine.
Yeah.
Each domain has its own certificate.
yeah,
And you get renewed all in the
Yeah.
same account. There are no issues with it. The only issue is that there is less of a minute of downtime per week.
yeah. So at the moment, if I set up a second IPv6 address on the box, I could use the standalone version of the certbot, because like I said, it has one that sets up its own web server. So I could have that on the second IP address for IPv6 and have all the names resolved to that. Once I have the certificate, it's not tied to an IP address, it's tied to a domain name. So I can install it on whichever machine. Actually, in this case, it would have to be the same machine that's running the service, because that's the DNS is going to send all the requests there, regardless of what type it is, regardless if it's web or email or whatever. So you have to end up running this, for the most part, on the box that you're going to have the service on.
So port doesn't really come into play.
The port doesn't come into play as to where you're going to be using it. It's an SSL certificate. You don't even have to have.
Well, no, but what I was thinking was like, I have a service and I want to manage certificates for it.
Yes.
But the service is a black box.
Yes.
I don't want to touch it. I don't want to modify how it's resolving.
Yeah.
Going to DNS involves going to a whole different machine. Now that starts to cross management domains.
Yeah.
So what if I just ran something that's, say, port 81 that just did Let's Encrypt, but it was local to the machine, so then I could pump that certificate sideways via the standard interface for uploading certificates into the application.
If the machine that you need the certificate for the other protocol doesn't actually have a web server of its own, then you can run the standalone version, and there will be a magic web server on that machine while the renewal is happening. And as soon as the renewal is over,
But can you have that standalone version run on port, say, 8080? So I have a weird Apache config that I don't want.
You don't want to
Starbuck to
touch.
touch.
You're running Java directly on page 8, port 80 or something like that.
Yeah.
I know.
And so can I run the certbot standalone and say on port 8080, do whatever the hell you want to give me a certificate?
I'm not. I know that it will follow redirects, so you could have in your main funny function, if it's possible to tweak it, you can have it do a redirect for .well-known, the entire .well-known / Let's Encrypt directory to another port number, even on the same box, even on a different box. Because as long as it makes the initial connection in this case on port 80, and I don't think you can override that. It may have changed in the last little while. As long as it can make the initial one, it'll follow any redirects that you put into it. So you can have
so you have like an 80 bounce to a 443 with then a redirect page that bounces to Let's Encrypt protocol port.
Yeah. So you can then run the standalone when you need to, and it'll bring up a server on the funny port number, and the request goes out, it comes back, bounces through the redirect inside the web server, which you don't want to touch, and comes back into the Let's Encrypt certbot while it's sitting there waiting, does the whole handshake, and certbot goes away, and if anybody tries to access any of those URLs, it's just going to time out on them.
You're going to have to touch it anyway to install, to let it
get a bad redirect.
as I thought.
Yeah, they get it. So,
Well, Apache isn't going to be listening or paying any attention to 443 or any other SSL certificate stuff by itself as it stands now. So you're going to have to touch it.
I have a number of SSL certificates already.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to touch any of that web config. So it'd be great if I could just say, great, I'm going to manually run a job and then set something up in cron.
Yeah.
Does something entirely separate to
Yeah.
make sure that in this directory there's
Yeah.
valid SSL certificates.
yeah.
And I might occasionally have to tell Apache to bounce itself.
Okay, very
Pick it up.
That's
If
easy.
you do standalone,
Yeah, you can set like manual define around the cloud.
Yeah.
if you standalone, you are responsible for putting the certificates wherever they belong to the
Yeah.
web server.
Yeah.
So I did it that way.
Yeah. Like I said, in that case, since for most of these applications, you have to tell it where the certificate and where the private key are hiding anyway, you just tell it where the live version of the certificate is under / et cetera, Let's Encrypt. And at that point, when that link is stable, unless you go and change, like when you renew a certificate, you can say, add an extra host to it, but leave the certificate name the same. And so if you're bringing up more stuff at home, but you only want to use one certificate because it's less confusing to say everybody uses that one. So you can just add them one at a time that way.
My other question was, since you're using IP6, can you do IP6 only hosts, or do you have to have IP4 connectivity?
Well, the one that the box that I have that's running jim.magnusden.ca is an IPv6 only host. And at the moment, the whole Let's Encrypt part for this doesn't even know that I have an IPv4 address, because the definition for that is up on my service is up on my service provider, which I have for some other stuff because my wife doesn't trust me to run everything out of the house 24/7, and so the business stuff is currently up. It's not the cloud, but it's out there. So it doesn't know that I am running all this stuff over an IPv6 tunnel into my house and then farming it off to the different boxes. When they initially came out 15 months ago, they couldn't handle that. They couldn't handle IPv6 only. That came in around Canada Day last summer. All of a sudden, I had this cron job waiting for IPv6, and one day it worked. And, so that was nice when they turned that on. They've, let's see if let's see for a second. Okay. So yeah, whether it's IPv6, IP4, combination of both doesn't matter. When it goes, it assumes that it's going to it assumes it's going to get the same files whichever way it gets there, which is what I would assume. So, so in that sense, yeah, it doesn't. You don't have to have an IPv4 presence anymore. So. But no, it's a really nice tool. I was setting up a couple this afternoon just to play with some of the newer things because, like I said, I first set things up about a year ago, and a lot of things like the Apache config was really iffy. It's working much better now. You can drop most of the command line arguments that you needed and basically just say, Apache, this domain name, go, and it'll come back. If there are any questions it doesn't know the answer for, it'll ask you. And after it's asked you, it'll remember your answers. So when you go to run the renewal script, it'll fill in the blanks for you. Any other questions?
I was going to say, pull for one last question. If anybody has it.
To somebody to stick on the login. There is one about Etsy, about the whole infrastructure on their back end to keep 100,000 certificates straight and away from prying eyes.
That is
It's
No,
not
they
trivial.
don't have much information they don't have very many secrets. They need to protect their key. And
They
need
have to protect all 100,000 keys.
No, they don't have any keys. They have public keys, but that's public keys. They need to protect their private key.
Yeah.
And they need to protect the magic numbers until they've been used.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
Oh,
all.
yes. But it's I'm sorry. It's how do you keep 100,000 plus keys?
No, but you don't need to store the keys.
You have to store the private key.
Well, you have to store them in the transparency report, but you don't have to keep them private.
Well, I guess if you want to pin your certs, you might have to worry about pulling off your
Oh, you're talking about Etsy's side.
That's the side of things.
Oh, no, they have a problem.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Let's-
I was confused.
Yeah, let's Encrypt never sees your private keys.
Yeah.
All they get is the
Public.
certificate signing request, and they give you a certificate back that will match the one that you have, and it's up to you to keep the public half public and the private half private. So with Etsy, it's just a case of how do you do that for 100,000 simultaneous users?
Shall we wind down? We'll take a quick break.
Break.
If you want to talk to Jeff more, can you
Yeah.
ask him to come to Abe and Herb? So, so that'll be my promo for after everything's finished. We usually head over to Abe and Herb Tannery for drink, dinner, something. If you don't know where that is, show of hands of people who would be going tonight.
I haven't been to Haven early.
Yeah, it's good fun.
I usually have to head home and do tracks. So